The B-17 didn't just drop bombs, it changed how wars were fought. Planes landed with half their bodies missing, crews froze at 30,000 feet, and one bomber kept flying with no pilot. These are 20 weird facts about the Boeing B-17, and the bonus. Let's just say Hitler called it the most dangerous plane in the sky. Strap in, this flight's about to get intense. The prototype crashed on its 5th flight. The very first B-17 prototype crashed on October 30th, 1935, killing 2 crew members including the pilot. Boeing test pilot Leslie Tower and Army Air Corps officer Major Ployer Hill died in the terrible crash. The plane took off from Wright Field in Ohio for an important demonstration flight for Army generals. The pilots forgot to remove the control locks, which are devices that hold the flight controls in place on the ground. The plane couldn't climb properly after takeoff because the controls were locked and wouldn't move. It stalled, crashed, and burst into flames near the runway with everyone watching in horror. Boeing almost lost everything because the Army blamed them for the crash at first. Later investigations proved it was pilot error, not a problem with the plane's design. Boeing was saved from bankruptcy, but they lost years of sales because of that one tragic mistake. If the prototype hadn't crashed, the B-17 might have entered service much earlier in World War II. Carried a 10-man crew, the B-17 carried 10 men squeezed inside on every dangerous mission over enemy territory. The crew included a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners protecting different positions. Each man had a specific job that was absolutely critical to completing the mission and getting home alive. The pilot and co-pilot sat in the cockpit flying the plane through flak and fighters. The bombardier lay flat in the glass nose aiming the bombs at targets below. The navigator used maps and instruments to guide them hundreds of miles to the target and back home. Gunners stood at their positions for hours in freezing cold, watching for enemy fighters attacking from any direction. The ball turret gunner curled up in a tiny sphere hanging under the plane with barely enough room to move. Radio operators kept contact with other planes in base while monitoring equipment. Flight engineers watched all the engines and systems, fixing problems in mid-flight while flying through combat. The ball turret was a death trap. The ball turret hung underneath the B-17's belly like a glass bubble with a man curled up inside. It was one of the most dangerous positions on the entire plane during combat missions. The gunner had to be small and flexible enough to squeeze into the tiny space with his knees pulled up to his chest. He sat with 2 50 caliber machine guns between his legs, rotating the entire sphere to aim at enemy fighters below. If the landing gear was damaged and wouldn't come down, the ball turret gunner would be crushed when a plane landed. There was no way to get out of the turret if the plane was crash landing on its belly. Some ball turret gunners were stuck inside when planes made emergency landings and were killed on impact. The space was so small that gunners couldn't wear parachutes inside, which meant certain death if the plane went down. Temperatures dropped to 60 degrees below zero at high altitude, and the gunner had no heat in that exposed position. Many ball turret gunners suffered from terrible nightmares and fear before each mission into combat over Germany. Flew at 30,000 feet without pressurization. B-17 crews flew at altitudes up to 30,000 feet where the air is incredibly thin and freezing cold. The planes had no pressurization system at all like modern airplanes have today for passenger comfort. Crew members had to wear oxygen masks for the entire mission, sometimes lasting 8 to 10 hours without a break. If your oxygen system failed at that altitude, you'd pass out in less than 30 seconds from lack of air. The temperature outside dropped to 60 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit at high altitude over Europe. Inside the plane wasn't much warmer because there was no heating system except for small electric suits. Crew members wore heavy leather jackets, boots, gloves, and heated suits that plugged into the plane's electrical system. Many men suffered from severe frostbite on their faces, hands, and feet during long missions in winter. Gunners standing at open windows in rushing wind got the coldest treatment of all crew positions. Some crew members lost fingers and toes to frostbite that became infected and had to be cut off later. Memphis Belle was the most famous. The Memphis Belle became the most famous B-17 bomber in history during World War II. The plane completed 25 combat missions over Europe and became the first bomber to do so with all crew surviving. Pilot Robert Morgan named the plane after his girlfriend Margaret Polk from Memphis, Tennessee. An artist painted a beautiful pinup girl on the nose with the name Memphis Belle in fancy letters. Hollywood made a documentary about the plane in 1944 while the war was still happening. The film showed real combat footage of the Memphis Belle fighting through flak and fighters over Germany. Millions of Americans watched the documentary in movie theaters and fell in love with the brave crew. After the war, the Memphis Belle toured America to sell war bonds and raise money. The plane is now fully restored and sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Ohio. A Hollywood movie was made about the Memphis Belle again in 1990, bringing the story to new generations who never knew about it. Could take incredible damage. The B-17 could survive damage that would destroy any other plane in the sky during the war. Bombers returned to base with huge holes blown through the wings and body from flak explosions. Some planes landed with entire sections of the tail missing, shot off by German fighters. One B-17 came back with over 1,000 bullet holes counted across the entire body and wings. Another bomber had 3 of its 4 engines completely destroyed and still made it back across the English Channel. The plane's strong aluminum construction and smart engineering made it tough as nails in combat. Wings could lose several feet of metal and still produce enough lift to fly home to England. The tail could be half blown away and pilots could still control the plane enough to land it. Mechanics at air bases were constantly amazed at the damage these planes survived during combat missions. The B-17's reputation for toughness saved thousands of crew members' lives during the war years over Europe. One landed itself with no pilot. A B-17 called the Phantom Fortress kept flying after the entire crew bailed out over Belgium in 1944. The plane was badly damaged by German fighters during a bombing mission over Germany. The pilot ordered everyone to jump with their parachutes because he thought the plane would crash any second. All 10 crew members parachuted out safely and were captured by German soldiers on the ground. But the B-17 didn't crash like the pilot expected it to do. The plane kept flying by itself on autopilot for miles across Belgium with nobody inside controlling it. It eventually ran out of fuel and made a perfect belly landing in a field near the town of Cortonwood. Farmers found the plane sitting in their field completely empty with engines still warm from flying. The plane had only minor damage and could have been repaired and flown again if anyone was there. The Phantom Fortress became one of the most mysterious and bizarre stories of World War II that people still talk about today. They called it the Flying Fortress. Boeing gave the B-17 its famous nickname, Flying Fortress, back in 1935, and it stuck forever. A reporter from the Seattle Times saw the plane covered in machine guns and said it looked like a flying fortress in the sky. Boeing loved the name so much they trademarked it immediately to use in advertising. The plane had up to 13 machine guns pointing in every direction to protect itself from enemy fighters. No other bomber in the world at that time had that much firepower for defense. The name made it sound tough and scary, which helped Boeing sell it to the military. The Army Air Corps wasn't sure they wanted such a big expensive bomber at first, but that nickname helped convince them this plane could protect itself and complete dangerous missions. The Flying Fortress became one of the most famous airplane names in all of military history, and everyone recognized it instantly. Built in a bowling alley, Boeing built the very first B-17 prototype in a building that used to be a bowling alley in Seattle in 1934. The company was so broke during the Great Depression, they couldn't afford a proper factory building. Workers bowled on those same lanes just years before planes were built there. The building was way too small for such a big airplane project. They had to carefully plan every step because there wasn't much room to move around inside. The prototype was called Model 299 before the military gave it the B-17 name. Boeing spent their own money to build it, hoping the Army would buy it after seeing it fly. The company risked going completely out of business if the Army didn't like the plane. Building a bomber in a former bowling alley sounds crazy, but it worked perfectly and led to one of the most important planes ever made in history. Cost more than a mansion. Each B-17 bomber cost about $240,000 to build in the early 1940s during the war. That doesn't sound like much today, but back then it was an absolute fortune. You could buy a nice house for $3,000 during that time period. One B-17 cost as much as 80 houses in a good neighborhood with yards and garages. A brand new car cost about $800, so one bomber equaled 300 new cars sitting on the lot. The average worker made about $1,400 per year total, so it would take 171 years of work to afford one plane. The government spent billions building over 12,000 of these expensive bombers during World War II. Each plane required about 30,000 hours of labor from factory workers to complete from start to finish. Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed all built B-17s in different factories to meet the huge demand for bombers during the war years. Dropped over 640,000 tons of bombs. B-17 bombers dropped over 640,000 tons of bombs on Germany and occupied Europe during World War II. That's more than 1.2 billion pounds of explosives falling from the sky on enemy targets. Each plane could carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs in its internal bomb bay for short missions. For longer missions deep into Germany, they carried 4,000 to 6,000 pounds to save weight for extra fuel. The bombs ranged from small 100-pound bombs to massive 2,000-pound bombs that could destroy entire buildings. Hundreds of B-17s flew together in huge formations, dropping thousands of tons in a single raid on one city. The bombardier aimed through a secret Norden bombsight that cost $8,000 each, almost as much as a house. They practiced bombing runs for hours to hit factories, railroad yards, and oil refineries with accuracy. The bombing campaign destroyed Germany's ability to make tanks, planes, and weapons for the war. Without the B-17's constant bombing, the war in Europe might have lasted years longer than it did. Lost 4,750 bombers in combat. The Army Air Force lost 4,750 B-17 bombers in combat during World War II over Europe. That's almost half of all the B-17s ever built being shot down or destroyed in crashes. Each lost plane meant up to 10 men killed, wounded, or captured by the enemy. Over 46,500 crew members were casualties during B-17 missions, killed or missing in action over Europe. Young men faced a terrifying 25% chance of dying before completing 25 missions to go home. Some bomb groups lost planes, even higher rates, with 30 or 40% never making it home. German fighters and anti-aircraft flak guns shot down bombers almost every single mission over Germany. The 8th Air Force alone lost 26,000 men killed, more than the entire Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. Crews knew the terrible odds, but climbed into their planes anyway to fight for freedom. The bravery of B-17 crews was incredible, facing almost certain death mission after mission over enemy territory. Secret bomb sight, the B-17 used the top secret Norden bombsight to aim bombs from 25,000 feet in the air. The military kept the Norden bombsight more secret than almost anything else during the entire war. Guards protected the bombsights, and crews had to cover them with canvas when not flying missions. If a plane was going to crash, the bombardier's orders were to destroy the bombsight before bailing out. The device cost about $8,000 each, which was more expensive than the cost of a nice house. It used mechanical computers and gyroscopes to calculate where bombs would fall based on altitude, speed, and wind. The bombardier could theoretically drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet if everything worked perfectly. In reality, weather, smoke, and enemy flak made accuracy much harder than the military claimed it would be. After the war, the Norden bombsight wasn't really as secret or accurate as everyone thought during the fighting, but it gave crews confidence and helped them hit targets better than just guessing where bombs would land. Flew missions over 10 hours long. Some B-17 missions lasted over 10 hours from takeoff in England to landing back home. Crews sat in cramped positions wearing oxygen masks the entire time without being able to relax. They couldn't eat regular food or drink much water because of the masks covering their faces constantly. The longest missions went deep into Germany to hit factories in Berlin or oil refineries in Romania. Pilots flew in formation for hours, concentrating intensely to avoid collisions with hundreds of other bombers nearby. Gunners scanned the sky constantly for enemy fighters that could attack from any direction at any moment. The stress and fear lasted for the entire mission until they finally crossed back over the English coast. Many crew members had to use relief tubes or bottles to go to the bathroom during the long flights. By the time they landed, everyone was exhausted, frozen, and some were wounded from combat over the target. Ground crews helped injured men out of the planes while mechanics counted bullet holes in the metal. The guns jammed from cold. The machine guns on B-17s often jammed from the extreme cold at high altitude during combat. The temperature at 25,000 feet could drop to 60 degrees below zero, freezing gun oil and mechanisms solid. Gunners desperately tried to clear jammed guns, while German fighters attacked from all directions at once. Some gunners fired short bursts every few minutes, just to keep the guns warm and working. The 50 caliber machine guns produced hot shell casings that rolled around on the floor, burning crew members. Spent shells filled up the plane during long battles until they were ankle deep in brass casings. The guns could fire 800 rounds per minute, going through ammunition incredibly fast during fighter attacks. Gunners wore heavy gloves that made it hard to reload ammunition belts with freezing fingers. Some men took their gloves off to work faster and suffered severe frostbite on their hands. If all the guns jammed at once, the B-17 became a defenseless target for enemy fighters to shoot down easily. Carried a crew member's lucky charm. Almost every B-17 crew had lucky charms they brought on every mission for good luck and survival. Some crews painted elaborate nose art on their planes, showing women, cartoon characters, or fierce animals. Others had mascots like stuffed animals or small toys that flew on every single mission. Crew members had personal lucky items like photographs, coins, or religious medals they carried in their pockets. Many men refused to fly if they forgot their lucky charm at the barracks before a mission. Some crews developed superstitious routines they had to do exactly the same way before every takeoff. They might touch certain parts of the plane in order or say specific words before climbing inside. If something disrupted the routine, they believed the mission would go badly and people would die. These superstitions helped young men cope with the incredible fear of facing death over Germany. Ground crews also participated, painting kill marks for each mission completed and enemy fighters shot down on the plane's nose. Some crews named their planes after girlfriends' crew members named their B-17s after girlfriends, wives, mothers, or female movie stars back home. The Memphis Belle was named after pilot Robert Morgan's girlfriend Margaret Polk from Memphis. Other famous names included Yankee Doodle, 909, Shoo 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 Baby, and Sentimental Journey. Artists painted beautiful pinup girls next to the names on the nose of the planes. The artwork gave each plane a unique personality and made it feel like home to the crew. Some names were funny, some were tough sounding, and some were romantic reminders of loved ones waiting. Crews felt proud of their plane and its name like it was a member of the team. If a crew was assigned a different plane for a mission, they felt uncomfortable and worried about bad luck. The names and artwork became so famous that people recognized specific planes just by their pictures. Today, restored B-17s still carry these historic names and artwork from World War II to honor the original crews. Could fly on two engines. The B-17 had 4 powerful engines, but could actually fly on just 2 if the others were destroyed. Many bombers limped home across the English Channel with 2 engines shot out by enemy fire. Pilots had to be incredibly skilled to keep the heavy bomber in the air with only half power. The plane would slowly lose altitude, but could sometimes make it back to England before crashing. Some B-17s crash-landed on beaches or in fields in France when they couldn't make it all the way home. The Wright Cyclone engines each produced 1/200 horsepower to push the heavy bomber through the sky. Losing 2 engines meant losing 2,400 horsepower and struggling to maintain altitude with full bomb loads. Pilots would sometimes drop bombs early or jettison equipment to reduce weight and stay airborne longer. The ability to fly on 2 engines saved hundreds of crews who would have died otherwise. This toughness added to the B-17's legendary reputation as a plane that could take punishment and survive. Gunners shot down enemy fighters. B-17 gunners shot down thousands of German fighter planes during the war over Europe. The bomber's 13 machine guns firing together created an incredible amount of defensive firepower in the sky. German pilots called the B-17 formations flying porcupines because they shot in every direction at once. The most successful gunner was Staff Sergeant Michael Aruth, who shot down 17 German planes from his position. Each gunner had to lead the target, aiming ahead of fast-moving fighters attacking at 400 miles per hour. The 50 caliber bullets could tear through the thin aluminum skin of German fighters and kill the pilot. Gunners received credit for shooting down a plane if it was seen crashing or exploding by other crew members. Many damaged German fighters limped home and were counted as probables instead of confirmed kills. The gunners worked as a team, calling out fighter positions to each other over the intercom system. Their accurate defensive fire forced German fighters to attack from difficult angles, saving countless B-17s from being shot down. Over 12,000 were built. Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed built over 12,731 B-17 bombers during World War II from 1936 to 1945. At the peak of production, factories completed 16 planes per day, rolling off assembly lines constantly. Women workers called Rosie the Riveters built most of the planes, while men fought overseas. The factories ran 24 hours a day with 3 shifts of workers to meet the military's huge demand. Boeing's Seattle plant, Douglas in Long Beach, and Lockheed Vega in Burbank all produced B-17s under license. Each plane required 30,000 hours of labor from thousands of workers doing different specialized jobs. The assembly lines used mass production techniques copied from automobile factories to speed up building. By 1944, America was producing more B-17s than Germany could shoot down each month over Europe. This incredible production capability helped win the war by overwhelming the enemy with numbers. After the war ended, most B-17s were cut up for scrap metal or used as target practice, with only a few surviving today. Bonus fact, Hitler called it his worst enemy. Adolf Hitler reportedly called the B-17 Flying Fortress his worst enemy during the war years. The constant bombing of German factories and cities drove him crazy with rage and frustration. He ordered his fighter pilots to stop the B-17s at any cost, even if it meant suicide attacks. German anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of shells at B-17 formations, filling the sky with deadly explosions. The Luftwaffe developed special tactics and weapons specifically designed to shoot down the Flying Fortress. They tried heavy cannons, rockets, and even ramming attacks to stop the bombing raids over Germany. Nothing worked well enough to stop the waves of B-17s that came every day and night. The bombing destroyed Germany's ability to make weapons and eventually helped win the war for the Allies. Hitler's worst enemy turned out to be a plane that almost didn't get built because it crashed on its 5th test flight back in 1935. From landing without pilots to flying through hell over Germany, the B-17 Flying Fortress proved that bravery and engineering can change the world. These young men faced death every single day and still climbed into their planes to fight for freedom. If these incredible stories amazed you, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that'll blow your mind and make you appreciate the heroes who came before us.